The Jewel in the Crown is a 1966 novel by Paul. Well in the Crown is a 1966 novel by Paul Scott that begins his Raj Quartet. The four-volume novel sequence of the quartet is set during the final days of the British Raj in India during the Second World War. The novel is written in the form of interviews and reports of conversations or research, and other portions are in the form of letters, epistolary form, or diary entries. The novel focuses on the triangle of an English woman, an Indian man, and a British police superintendent, setting up the events of subsequent novels in the series. It is considered Scott's major work. The title itself, which is also an expression for something most valuable, refers to the fact that India was considered to be the most valuable possession of the British Empire. The plot has direct similarities to the novel A Passage to India by E.M. Forster, published in 1924. Paul Mark Scott, the 25th of March 1920 to the 1st of March 1978, was an English novelist best known for his tetralogy The Raj Quartet. In the last years of his life, his novel Staying On won the Booker Prize 1977. The series of books was dramatized by Granada Television during the 1980s and won Scott the public and critical acclaim that he had not received during his lifetime. Born in suburban London, Scott was posted to India, Burma and Malaya during World War II. On return to London he worked as a notable literary agent, before deciding to write full-time from 1960. In 1964 he returned to India for a research trip, though he was struggling with ill health and alcoholism. From the material gathered he created the novels that would become the Raj Quartet. In the final years of his life he accepted a visiting professorship at the University of Tulsa, where much of his private archive is held. Historical fiction is a literary genre in which a fictional plot takes place in the setting of particular real historical events. Although the term is commonly used as a synonym for historical fiction literature, it can also be applied to other types of narrative, including theater, opera, cinema, and television, as well as video games and graphic novels. It often makes many use of symbolism and allegory, using figurative and metaphorical elements to picture a story. An essential element of much of some of historical fiction is that it is set in the past and pays attention to the manners, social conditions and other details of the depicted period. Authors also frequently choose to explore notable historical figures in these settings, allowing readers to better understand how these individuals might have responded to their environments. The historical romance usually seeks to romanticize eras of the past. Some subgenres such as alternate history and historical fantasy insert intentionally ahistorical or speculative elements into a novel. Works of historical fiction are sometimes criticized for lack of authenticity because of readerly criticism or genre expectations for accurate period details. This tension between historical authenticity and fiction frequently becomes a point of comment for readers and popular critics, while scholarly criticism frequently goes beyond this commentary, investigating the genre for its other thematic and critical interests. Historical fiction as a contemporary Western literary genre has its foundations in the early 19th century works of Sir Walter Scott and his contemporaries in other national literatures such as the Frenchman Honoré de Balzac, the American James Fenimore Cooper, and later the Russian Leo Tolstoy. However, the melding of historical and fictional elements in individual works of literature has a long tradition in many cultures, both Western traditions as early as ancient Greek and Latin literature, as well as Eastern, in the form of oral and folk traditions, see mythology and folklore, which produced epics, novels, plays and other fictional works describing history for contemporary audiences. Plot introduction. Edit. Much of the novel is written in the form of interviews and reports of conversations and research from the point of view of a narrator. Other portions are in the form of letters from one character to another or entries in their diaries. Still others take the form of reports from an omniscient observer. Setting. Edit. The story is set in 1942 in Mayapur, a fictional city in an unnamed province of British India. The province, which is located in northern India, shares characteristics with Punjab and the United Provinces. The names of places and people suggest a connection to Bengal. For example, Mayapur is similar to Mayapur in West Bengal. However, the physical characteristics place the setting in north-central India, rather than in northeast India. The province has an agricultural plain and, in the north, a mountainous region. Dibrapur is a smaller town about 75 miles away. Mayapur, although not the capital of the province, is a relatively large city, with a significant British presence in the cantonment area, where native Indians are not permitted to live. Across the rail lines lies the Black Town, where the native population resides. There is also a Eurasian quarter, the residents of the mixed-race Anglo-Indian population of the city. Plot summary. Edit. Daphne Manners, who has lost her immediate family in England, comes to India to live with her only remaining family member, Lady Manners. Lady Manners sends her to Mayapur to stay with her Indian friend, Lady Chatterjee. While staying with Lady Chatterjee, whom she calls Auntie Lily, Daphne meets Hari Kumar. He is an Indian who was brought up in England and educated at Chillingborough, a public school that Daphne's own brother attended. Hari speaks only English, but his father's financial collapse and suicide obliged Hari to return to India. Daphne learns to despise the attitudes of the English in India and also grows to love Hari. Subsequent to Kumar's arrest and Daphne's association with him, the local police superintendent, Ronald Merrick, becomes infatuated with Daphne. Merrick, of lower middle-class English origin, is resentful of the privileged English, public school, class and contemptuous of Indians. Hari thus represents everything that Merrick hates. After Daphne and Hari make love in a public park, the Bibigar Gardens, they are attacked by a mob of rioters who by chance witnessed their lovemaking. Hari is beaten and Daphne is raped repeatedly. Knowing that Hari will be implicated in her rape, Daphne swears him to silence regarding his presence at the scene. But she does not count on the instincts of Ronald Merrick, who, upon learning of the rape, immediately takes Hari into custody and engages in a lengthy and sadistic interrogation that includes sexual humiliation. Merrick also arrests a group of educated young Indians, including some of Hari's colleagues at the Mayapur Gazette. Daphne steadfastly refuses to support the prosecution of Hari and the others for rape. She insists that her attackers were peasants and included at least one Muslim. Although she was blindfolded, she could tell he was circumcised and could not be young, educated Hindus like Hari and his acquaintances who have been taken into custody. The inquest is frustrated when Daphne threatens to testify that, for all she knows, her attackers could have been Englishmen. Hari puzzles the authorities by refusing to say anything. Even in his own defense, he has been sworn to secrecy by Daphne, and he honors that pledge to the letter. Because the authorities cannot successfully prosecute him for rape, they instead imprison him under a wartime law as a suspected revolutionary. And Daphne's refusal to aid a prosecution for rape leads to her being reviled and ostracized by the British community of Mayapur and of British India as a whole, where her case has become a cause célèbre. Unknown to Hari, Daphne is pregnant. The child's paternity is impossible to determine, but she considers the child to be Hari's. She returns to her aunt, Lady Manners, to give birth, but a pre-existing medical condition results in her death. Lady Manners takes the child, Parvati, to Kashmir. Parvati's physical resemblance to Hari satisfies Lady Manners and Lady Chatterjee that Hari was her biological father. A 1966 book review in Kirkus Reviews called the novel, a slow-moving one, filled with a tremendous number of ideas, views, speculations imposed in an attempt to convey the contradictions between not only England and India, but within India itself, a cosmos in which there are many circles within circles, mystical, social, political. The review summarized, it is certainly Paul Scott's major work and it has already been established that he is a thoughtful and tasteful writer, even though he has never achieved the readership some of his books have deserved and many of the reviewers have indicated. In a 2017 article in the New York Times, Isaac Chodoner called Scott's achievement was to tell this story largely from the British point of view, and to do so not merely without illusions but with astonishing acuity and grace. The Jewel in the Crown is a novel that takes place primarily in British-controlled India in the 1940s. The central story is that of a young British woman named Daphne Manners who is living in Mayapur, a fictional Indian town. Daphne falls in love with an Indian man named Hari Kumar, who was raised in England but has returned to India after the death of his father. Their relationship is controversial in the small town, where the Europeans, Indians, and those of mixed race are all segregated into separate parts of town. Daphne and Hari meet one night in a secluded park called the Bibigar Gardens where they make love for the first time. After, they are attacked by a group of Indian men. Hari is tied up and Daphne is raped. Fearing Hari will be blamed for the rape, Daphne makes him promise to say nothing about being with her in the gardens. He is later arrested along with some other young men by Ronald Merrick, a British police superintendent who has designs on Daphne himself. Hari says nothing in his own defense except that he was not at the gardens that night. Daphne refuses to cooperate in identifying the other young men in fear of implicating Hari. With no strong evidence, the rape charges are dropped against Hari and the others, but they are found guilty of political crimes against the British occupation and sent to prison. Daphne and Hari never see each other again. She becomes pregnant after the night in the garden and later dies in childbirth. It is a time of political unrest in India. The British have promised to leave India to govern itself for many years, but when World War II breaks out, Britain fears that the Japanese will invade India if they leave. Indian leaders like Mahatma Gandhi call for the British to leave, and the British administrative and military establishment actively try to suppress any unrest in the towns. It is against the backdrop of a short period of public protest and unrest that most of the events of The Jewel in the Crown take place. The tensions between the native Indian population of the town and the British civil and military authorities are high. Political, racial and religious differences create a dangerous and uncertain environment when the long-standing traditions of British rule begin to unravel. The novel is written in several episodes and Scott frequently changes the point of view, letting the same story be told through the eyes of different characters. Events are not presented in strict chronological order, and the actual facts of what happens on the night of Daphne's rape are not revealed until the final pages. Plot summary. Set in 1942, English author Paul Scott's historical novel The Jewel in the Crown 1966 follows a young English woman who moves to India during the waning years of British rule. The first of Scott's four-volume series, The Raj Quartet, The Jewel in the Crown was later adapted into a 1984 miniseries on ITV. More recently, The New York Times cited the book in a 2017 article, The Novels Explaining Britain's Path from the Raj to Brexit. Daphne Manners, a young woman living in London during World War II, describes herself as galumphing, as if to suggest that she is plain or unattractive. For a time, she works as an ambulance driver during the German Blitz bombing campaign in 1940 and 1941, but a heart condition forces her to abandon such stressful work at her doctor's orders. When German airstrikes kill both her parents and her brother, she moves to British-ruled India to live with her closest living relative, her great-aunt Lady Ethel Manners. Ethel lives in Rawalpindi in what is now the Punjab region of Pakistan. In order for Daphne to meet more young people her age, Ethel sends her niece to the Mayapur region of West Bengal, 130 kilometers north of Calcutta, to stay with Lady Chatterjee, a proud noblewoman. During her stay, Daphne finds herself attracted to Hari Kumar, a journalist at the Mayapur Gazette. Though born in India, Hari was brought up in England where he attended Chillingborough, the same exclusive school where Daphne's brother went. But when Hari's father, a successful businessman, goes bankrupt and commits suicide, Hari is forced to return to India. There, he finds himself an outcast in both Indian and English societies in a town that, like much of India at this time, is segregated along racial lines. Daphne's relationship with Hari is extremely controversial. For her part, Daphne is disgusted by the racist attitudes held by most English people toward Indians. One night, Daphne and Hari meet in a secluded park known as the Bibigar Gardens. There, they make love for the first time but are interrupted by a group of angry Indian men. The men beat and tie up Hari, and rape Daphne multiple times. Daphne refuses to report the rape, knowing that the local police superintendent, Ronald Merrick, will assume Hari is among the men responsible. She swears Hari to secrecy in an effort to protect him. Merrick is extremely bigoted toward Indians, partly because, as a man born into a lower-class family, he is viewed as inferior in England. In India, however, he relishes the fact that he sits atop the social hierarchy by virtue of his birthplace and skin color. Despite Daphne and Hari's silence about the rape, Merrick hears about it and arrests Hari along with some of the men responsible. To Merrick, Hari represents everything he hates, an Indian educated in a top English school. Merrick's animosity only grows when he meets Daphne and becomes infatuated with her. Merrick's subsequent interrogation of Hari devolves into a sadistic game involving sexual humiliation. Daphne, meanwhile, does everything in her power to free Hari, even if that means letting the real rapists go free. First, she claims that she was blindfolded and therefore cannot identify her assailants. When that doesn't satisfy Merrick, she says that she could feel that the attackers' penises were circumcised, indicating to her that they were Muslim peasants, not young Hindus like the men in custody. Because Daphne swore him to secrecy over the attack, Hari refuses to speak in his own defense, despite the fact that Daphne's reason for the secrecy oath was Hari's protection. Eventually, the case is dropped when Daphne threatens to testify that Englishmen raped her. This leads to Daphne being ostracized by the English community in Mayapur and later, as news of the case spreads throughout the country, the entirety of British India. Forced to drop the rape charges, Merrick instead charges Hari with an obscure wartime law prohibiting anti-imperial revolutionary activities. Hari is sent to prison, and Daphne becomes pregnant. She hopes the child is Hari's, but it could belong to any of the men who raped her. She returns to Ethel's home and goes into labor. Tragically, she dies during childbirth, a consequence of the same heart condition a doctor diagnosed her with in England. To Ethel's eyes, the baby Parvati bears a striking physical resemblance to Hari. The Jewel in the Crown is a dispiriting novel that lays bare the stark racial and class divisions in British India. In this book, Scott examines India under British rule in 1942, the period towards the end of the Raj, in a large fictional town called Mayapur. The narrative is told from several different points of view, some directly, and others as if the characters are reminiscing to someone about the events of 20 years previously. The event which is central to the novel is the rape of an English girl, Daphne Manners, by unknown Indian assailants in the Bibigar gardens of the town, an event which we find out is part of widespread unrest resulting from the arrest of several local Congress Party members by the British rulers. The books of the Raj Quartet were filmed for television back in the 1980s when sweeping, expensive costume drama was still being made in the UK, with Susan Wooldridge as Daphne and Ard Malik as Hari Kumar, though I imagine the books to have been considerably condensed for television, given the experience of reading this novel. Though the plot, summarized neatly in a Wikipedia article, is simple enough, the way Scott tells it certainly isn't. In short, orphaned Daphne Manners comes to India to live with her aunt, Lady Manners, in Rawalpindi. Lady Manners is one of those unusual Britons who have Indian friends and see Indians as equal to Britons. She suggests that Daphne visit Mayapur to stay with her old friend Lily Chatterjee. Hari Kumar has been educated at an exclusive public school, Chillingborough, coincidentally where Daphne's brother was educated and brought up as an Englishman, though his father is Indian. However, before Hari can complete his schooling, his father dies bankrupt, and he must return to India. He is taken in by his aunt, Shalini, but finds himself in an unenviable position, neither Indian nor English. He and Daphne meet at a party at Lady Chatterjee's, and they become friends and later, lovers. Ronald Merrick is superintendent of police in Mayapur, a grammar school boy, with a chip on his shoulder and racist views. His resentment of Hari, since Hari is both Indian and more exclusively educated than Merrick, as well as the fact that Daphne clearly prefers him to Merrick, leads to Hari's arrest, torture and imprisonment after Daphne's rape, and his own failure to investigate the attack properly. Scott casts his net wide, giving us many narrative voices from both British and Indian people involved to greater or lesser extents in the tragedy, ranging from the colonel commanding the British forces in the town with his very traditional attitude towards Indians and his insistence on seeing the unrest as a problem to be tackled solely in a military way, to the lawyer Mr. Srinivasan who recounts the story and gives details of the politics surrounding the events, as well as those told by an omniscient narrator but featuring the thoughts and actions of one main character. It's very cleverly done, with each section having a distinctive voice. Some are more affecting than others. Scott also writes in great detail, making the reader very aware of the sights and sounds of the world he is describing, even to the way the tables are set in the Gymkhana Club, but which rather bogs down the plot in the first half of the book. It's not to say that these details are in themselves boring or tedious, far from it, it's just that it's as well to bear in mind that Scott examines British India in its dying days through a very personal story, and it's only in the last part of the book that the reader is acquainted with the full details of that story through Daphne's journal. Despite this multiplicity of viewpoints, the characters are clearly drawn, and their motivations are understandable even when the characters themselves are not sympathetic. Ronald Merrick, for example. Daphne's story is the most affecting, particularly through the poignancy of the ending, and it's in her story that we actually learn what really happened. Though by that time, Scott has shown us how it came about, and how it sparked unrest, in narrative that is peripheral to Daphne's ordeal. Writers so far writing of the Raj era have missed the essence of understanding among the people living in India, irrespective of race, class, caste and gender. Multiculturalism in literature exposed the voice of minorities and multiculturalists, remained reformers not transformers. MacDonald, 2011, and Scott is one such reformer who aims at the unification of the binaries. In the historical backdrop of Indian freedom struggle, he depicts the real picture of India, presenting human life in extraordinary situations and shows the relation between the British and the Indian people. The empire does not hold a singular perspective, as it has many voices for whom the First World is only one oppressor. Barkhan, 1994, and Scott engages into a rereading of the Raj era, highlighting different attributes that make up a multicultural society. For Scott, the political and economic factor is far less relevant than the social factor, and instead of why and how, he is concerned of what happened in the Raj era. He addresses the love that existed among the Hindus, Muslims, Indian, British and the Eurasians, and represents a new India engulfed in the trauma of Second World War and ignited in the wake of freedom struggle. Scott placed his characters in various relationships to their environment, to each other, and ultimately to the reader. Haswell, 2002, page 65, and presents personal connections that stands as the hallmark of a society. Scott in the opening page of his novel writes, "This is the story of a rape, of the events that led up to it and followed it, and of the place in which it happened. There are the action, the people, and the place, all of which are interrelated but in their totality incommunicable in isolation from the moral continuum of human affairs." Scott, 2005, page 1. But the novel is much more than the story of a rape. It assesses the nuances of human relationships transcending the periphery of conflicts and divisions, propagates a universal humanitarian outlook. Weinbaum beautifully describes the novel as panoramic in scope and microscopic in detail. The book recreates the events, sights, sounds and smells of British India in the 1940s, 1978, page 100. It is fascinating to study about India, a home to different cultures, languages, religions and communities, and Scott does this enthusiastically, who knew that the acknowledgement of differences marks the trait of being an Indian. He delves into the relationship of the private lives of the individuals to history, the relativity of what we know as truth, the epistemological question, the difficulty of arriving at truth, the isolation of individuals, the relation of a man's life to his vocation or career, the lost childhood and the quest for paradise. Rubin, 1986, page E. Orville Prescott in his 1966 review of The Jewel in the Crown wrote, "It may be one of the finest novels about India since E.M. Forster's As a Passage to India," quoted in Weinbaum, 1978. Jacqueline Banerjee rightly says about the novel, "It is time now to see it not simply as a major work about the end of the empire, but also, and much more importantly, as an exploration of the greatest problem we face today: how best to live our lives in a multicultural world." 2009, page 83. We're introduced to Miss Edwina Crane in the first chapter itself, who had lived in India for 35 of her 57 years, Scott, 2005, page 6. She represents the British subaltern who traveled to India after the death of her father as a traveling nurse companion. Almost all Anglo-Indian texts so far dealt with the experiences of the British upper class, their thrilling experiences and the legacy of the Crown. However, The Jewel in the Crown is a novel with a difference. It engages in the analysis of characters representing the bottom strata of the society, instead of discussing the effluent lots. Miss Edwina Crane represents the colonizer, but she is herself a subject of the colonial system. Her position in Britain as well as in India is not equivalent to the ruling class, and there is a stiff difference between Edwina and other British characters in the novel. In doing so, Paul Scott, though termed as the chronicler of the Raj nostalgia, Rushdie, 1985, is inadvertently positioning a postcolonial stand. However, he cannot be termed a postcolonial writer as he represents the colonial class. His characters are through and through individuals and all distinct in types. No two characters can be placed under an umbrella. His work thoroughly bears testimony to multiculturalism that addresses voices of varied kind. It is Edwina, who in the course of action becomes a missionary teacher, sets the tone in the novel in maintaining a bridge between imperialism to multiculturalism. She is an ardent supporter of India and strongly believes that India must be independent. When the war's over, we've got to give up her. Scott, 2005, page 26. She voices the harmony and oneness in human nature, which can excel through the fragments of culture, race and religion, rising in sublime and lofty feelings of human and humanism. She is happy to work in India for the mission and believes that it is through her engagement with the mission that she acquired an admiration for the Indians through love and respect for their children. Scott, 2005, page 3. Miss Crane, though familiar with many uprisings in India, is always afraid of one, and the only hope for the country she loved lay in the coming together at last of its population and its rulers as equal partners. Scott, 2005, page 41. The scope of Indo-British relationship through personal connections and individual qualities finds new vista in the novel. This is initiated with the everlasting relationship of Edwina Crane and Mr. Chaudhary, the teacher in the Dibrapur school. Class, race, nationality and religion do not in any way shape their relationship, instead circumstances strengthen their relationship and they are committed to serious sacrifices. Mr. Chaudhary is a different personality in contrast to his wife, who is old-fashioned. He is sophisticated and westernized and prefers to wear foreign clothes, at least in the company of Miss Crane. The day of the riot marks an important chapter in the life of Miss Crane as well as in the life of Mr. Chaudhary. They hurriedly hand over the children to their parents, after they were informed of the riot, and Miss Crane decides to return back to Mayapur. Mr. Chaudhary requests her to stay back, but she insists to return, so he accompanies her, thinking that she will be safe in the company of an Indian. He leaves his wife back and proceeds to Mayapur, but they meet a gang of rioters in the way. The rioters were surprised to see Mr. Chaudhary in the company of an English woman and label him as a traitor. They stood in the middle of the road to block the way. Mr. Chaudhary tells Miss Crane to keep going, crashing the rioters, but she couldn't. She tightened her mouth preparing to obey, but failed. She couldn't drive into a mass of living creatures. Scott, 2005, page 63. The rioters in turn smashed Miss Crane into the drain and kill Mr. Chaudhary. The image of Edwina Crane holding the hand of dead Chaudhary after the riot speaks volume about the kind of relationship they share. When all the rules of the society fail, it is the humanity that speaks up and lends direction. Edwina Crane and Mr. Chaudhary may be strong opponents in the pages of history book, but when it comes to human affairs, they are equal in one. She was so close to Mr. Chaudhary that her taste of music was also similar to him, and the only music she ever listened to when with the Chaudharys was Indian classical music. Scott, 2005, page 49. Our contemporary reading of the novel, written in the neo-colonial period about colonial India, has many things to offer. It lends direction to engage and adjust in a society that is no more homogeneous. The development of love affair between Daphna Manners, the English girl staying in India, and Hari Kumar, an Indian who has acquired English education, also marks the multicultural element in the novel. They hail from different backgrounds, they know their position and status in the society, yet they make an effort to relate as humans. The novel captures the ethos and echoes of the Raj era, and come up with new possibilities and new dimensions. This is why Crane writes, Scott, as many earlier Anglo-Indian writers had certainly done, is concerned primarily in the Raj Quartet with what might usefully be termed the index of whiteness that operates within Anglo-Indian society, and indeed British society as a whole, and necessarily inflects the relationship between British men and women in India and Indians. Crane, 2004, page 19. They started with friendship and ended in love with a conscious frame of mind. Daphna is happy when their friendship blossoms into love and feels that they have attained a much-needed unification of races. However, their relationship is short-lived, it dies premature. Though they do not contribute to its death, the external factors led to the death of their transcendent togetherness. Daphna Manners is raped by a gang of Indian youth in the night of the 9th August 1942, and later, Hari is arrested by Ronald Merrick on the charges of rape. Many question Scott why there is the rape of an English girl. Instead it should be the rape of an Indian girl that metaphorically describes the rape of India by the British. Some commented that the assault in the Bibigar Gardens is an attack on humanity, by those who lack the slightest respect for it. Banerjee, 2009, page 80. The issue is further complicated after the rape, and the struggle of Hari begins from the Bibigar incident. He is asked to remain silent by Daphna and he does so, but his silence lends him into serious conflict and he has to face terrible consequences. The feedback offered by Daphna herself in the interrogation lends a new direction, and the Indo-British relation is questioned at its core. The incident gathered so much focus that the novel is considered more a story of rape, while it is an examination of the Raj era that redefines Orientalism, post-colonialism and multiculturalism. Hari finds himself in a no-man's land when he had to return to India after the death of his father. His British education failed to find his lost self, and Hari can be seen not only as a modern anti-hero caught in a paradox, but also again with regard to the Raj discourse as an angry retort to Rudyard Kipling's most popular creation, Bachman, 1997, page 238. He can speak English more fluently than an Englishman can, but he cannot speak Indian language. This resulted in the loss of his self. He is in a dilemma about his identity. The British education that he hoped would rescue him at the hour of crisis, lends him into one. He laments when his friend Colin does not recognize him. I am invisible not only to white people because they are white and I am black, but invisible to my white friend because he can no longer distinguish me in crowd. Scott, 1995, 300. Hari is not a mimic character of Naipaul but a hybrid character of Baba who has inherited both Indian and British qualities. Hari, though seems British, could not represent the British but failed to be an Indian too. His love with Daphne suggests the possibility of the union between the East and the West, and they celebrate difference cutting across the boundaries of race, class, culture and language.